Welcome to the Friday Spiritual Checkup for May the 1st. In these Fridays, I've decided to share some of the key authors and books that have shaped my spiritual life over the years. And I'm encouraging you to send in a list of some of the authors and books that have been very instrumental in your life over the years. I'm looking for Christian authors reflecting on a theological theme to try and narrow the list down. And some of you have sent in your authors, and thanks so much for doing that. I'll maybe compile a list of the authors that overlap and see if we can come up with our Bonavista Baptist top 10 authors that have shaped us spiritually. Well, one of the things I really appreciated about studying at Regent College in Vancouver is that it broadened my reading horizons by forcing me to read some authors that I hadn't heard of and I probably wouldn't have turned to on my own. And so some of these authors I agree with wholeheartedly, and some of them I didn't agree with everything they wrote or said, and that's okay. In fact, sometimes it's good to read someone that we don't always agree with in order to discern what we really believe. Well, two authors today that I want to introduce you to are both American authors, both still living, and both come at their Christian faith from very different angles. The first author is Frederick Buechner, and I know his name kind of looks like Buchner, but apparently on his website it's Buechner. And Frederick Buechner was born in 1926. It makes him about 93 years old, and he's still living. And he's actually an ordained Presbyterian minister. Buechner has written a lot of fiction books, and a lot of them that I've read have been very instrumental. The Book of Beb is kind of 4 different novels all in one, and that's been fascinating. He's written a couple of books that are based on old saints like Brendan the Voyager or on Godric, and we'll put those up if you want to take a chance to read those. He wrote a book called The Storm, which is really a modern paraphrase of Shakespeare's The Tempest, and so lots of kind of fiction books. But the book that really stood out for me is his memoirs. And in his memoirs, and in my case I have 3 copies and it's all forms one book. In his memoirs, he looks back over his life and he reflects theologically on his life. This was a new idea for me. I know sometimes we've written out genealogies or sort of our family tree and history, and that's great to do that. But to actually sit down and look back over your life and trace the finger of God through that journey is fascinating. And so Sacred Journey was his early years, and that was very profound, and I found it very enjoyable to read. And then he has Now and Then and Telling Secrets to complete his whole reflection, theological reflection on his life. Here's one of the quotes I love from Sacred Journey. He says this: "You can survive on your own. You can grow strong on your own. You can prevail on your own, but you cannot become human on your own." It's kind of food for thought. Or here's another quote from the Sacred Journey. He says, "Listen, your life is happening. You are happening. Think back on your journey, the music of your life." And so it's a different approach to theological writing because it looks at the layers of our life and it traces the finger of God through that journey. So Frederick Buechner, he's written a lot of other things, The Alphabet of Grace and a few others, but his memoirs are what stand out for me and have been very instrumental in shaping my understanding of the Christian journey. Okay, one more author for today. This author might be a little bit more controversial because he has been known to be an activist in the past, and he writes about topics that are sometimes controversial, and his name is Wendell Berry. Wendell Berry is still alive. He's 85 years old today, and he's written a number of nonfiction books, including The Unsettling of America, Culture and Agriculture is one of the books that he wrote. And another book that I've read is Sex, Economy, Freedom, and Community. And both of these are incredibly challenging books. They give a kind of critique of modern North American culture. They cause us to kind of set back and think about what we're doing with the earth, what we're doing with the resources that we have. And so it's an incredibly challenging look at that. One of the things that Wendell Berry mourns is the loss of a vibrant rural community. So he often takes us back to smaller towns, to family farms, to rural community, to families who have been rooted and grounded in a place for generations. And one of the ways he does that is through his fiction writing. This is a great book. Jayber Crow is one of the books he writes about a small town, a small farming community, and about the people and the lives that live in that community. This talks about a young man who had planned to be a pastor, a minister, and he gave it up to become the town barber and kind of his adventures in that. But the book that really has stood out for me, and it's a very thin one, easy to read, is a short novel called Remembering. And it's about a young man that loses his hand in a corn picking machine, and he goes on a bit of a journey to rediscover his place in this world. And so Remembering is a book that has really inspired me. Here's a couple of quotes from Wendell Berry, just to kind of set it up for you. One thing he says, rats and roaches live by competition, under the laws of supply and demand. It is the privilege of human beings to live under the laws of justice and mercy. And so you see how he can give a bit of a critique of society, even through his words. Here's one more from Sex, Economy, Freedom, and Community. A community is the mental and spiritual condition of knowing that the place is shared and that the people who share the place define and limit the possibilities of each other's lives. Now that's a bit more of a dense quote, and you have to unpack that a little bit, but that's what he does for us. He forces us to think. In fact, I think both of these authors have caused me to think in different ways about my life, about my interaction with God, about my interaction with other human beings, and about my interaction with place, with being rooted and grounded in a place at a particular time with a particular group of people. So there's two very different authors, two American authors, and if you pick them up to read them, know that you probably won't agree with everything that they write, but they can be companions that help us to think differently about our lives in relation to God and the world around us. So thanks for joining today. Don't forget to send in your list of different authors that have influenced you, and remember to join us on Sunday morning at 10 a.m. for worship.